If you are wondering about what the future of work is, you want to develop your language skills. You want to get good at written communication and delegation because what you will be doing and what knowledge work is going to be transforming into is basically automating workflows with agents. You're going to be taking your day to day, whether it's like organizing people in meetings, doing SEO reports, do sales calls, you're going to be putting that in an agent. Let's fast forward, let's start mixing it with crypto. Create that agent. There's no reason that agent cannot be created equity on the blockchain. And every time that thing runs, you get paid a dividend. Every time those tokens run, you get a percentage of the work that you create. So agents can create equity and not unemployment. Like that's the future. When you mix these technologies, you can turn the workflows and your talent in your brain into a cash flowing asset that runs while you sleep.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
Well, welcome back to Unlocking Commerce and Business. I'm your host, Connie Davis, obviously founder of Maiden Explorations and the hostess of the show today. I have been, just navigating and exploring the world out there. We've been talking about all things commerce, all things traditional infrastructure of money. And I am still sitting here wondering why so many people are still locked outside of it, why we have so much financial illiteracy or economic disempowerment. And on this show, I talk about it as plainly as possible that commerce is the full exchange of human value, not just money. It's not just about transactions, it's the full exchange of who we are. But today we're going to get into something I think really different. And I'm really excited about that because if you've been listening to some of the shows that we've had before, it's a setup for the conversation we're going to have today because we've had AI reshaping every industry on the planet. We've been talking about, barriers and blocks to commerce with certain communities. We've got blockchains being built as we speak, regulation going on at the national and the federal and the global level. We've got rails for a new economy that most people haven't even really thought about really coming into existence yet. And in the middle of all of it, there is this continues to be small business owners, nonprofit directors, first generation founders who have great ideas, but no idea how to build their business and no roadmap. People that aren't tech savvy, and people that are about to maybe even be swept away by this wave of change of technology or could be lifted by it. So, my guest today has a gift. And I'm really excited for you guys to really see the gift that's going to come out from his spirit today. He can see around corners and he builds the tools for the next economy. And today he's right here with us. He's going to help us understand what's actually coming. We're going to talk some philosophical questions. We're going to talk a little bit about history. And more importantly, we're going to talk about the people who have the most to gain and what you can actually gain from the technology that's coming. So stay with us here. So Andrew Olseen is here. Andrew, welcome to the Unlocking Commerce and Business show.
Thanks,
And
Colin.
We're so excited to have you today. I
Yeah, I'm
want to
excited to be here.
Yeah, we had a great first interview, and I just want to draw out more of all of that for the audience and the listeners who are spending their time with me here on this show. And I want to start right at the beginning because I remember that that pre-interview that we had, and we really got into some I think some history, but you had also said that you're really good at predicting some of the future, and that's a really
Sure.
big statement. But I know you've been in some early places, so can you share a little bit about how this, like, a little bit of a crystal ball kind of came to be for you? Can you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, so, what it really boils down to is you know, I got lucky. My parents, they paid for my education and I went to an arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts actually. And that education, it was very, you learned a little bit about a lot of things. History, physics, math, and I majored into computer animation because it was a mix of like
Hmm.
math, physics, art, a lot of different topics. And I was always very curious, right? And it's involved with storytelling as well, like literature, and it was a field that covered everything. I really enjoyed working in that field, and then so it was a high paying career. I had no debt, so I had opportunity capital, and then I stumbled across Bitcoin on Reddit, and I was like, what is this? I just clicked. It said "R Bitcoin." I didn't know because I mistyped something. I was searching for something, and that sub came up, and then I saw it, I was like, people were moving money around without a bank, or a
Mm,
government. I'm like, well, as soon as I saw it, I was like, well, this is gonna change everything. And I was intensely curious of, like, why didn't that happen earlier? Because it happened in 2009. I came across it in 2011. I started putting money in it in 2012. So very early, and I went all in, because I was like, well, everything's gonna change.
yeah.
But then I started, like, learning about it because 'cause I'm putting money in it, like, the software is open source, I can check this out. Then I started learning about the traditional finance system of, well, like, why it's set up the way it is. And then you learn about something called market infrastructure. And
Mhm.
this is so far away from us, and it's so important. It's like the first invention of our civilization, of recording a promise, essentially. We have to have a record that's tamper-proof and verifiable. It cannot change under any circumstances. And that's something called a clearinghouse. And that's what
Uh-huh.
Bitcoin solved, programmatically. And it was thought to be an impossible computer science problem. It solved the FLP, impossibility proof, and the digital asset exchange problem. And those two problems were how our entire financial industry was architected to scale to what it is today, to get around those two problems. And that's the way it's designed. And it's actually a miracle that it even got up and running the way it is. Um, and it's genuinely incredible that it's carried us this far. But now we have a new way of doing things. So that was kind of the origin of, how I encountered that, of learning about that market infrastructure. And then you learn about, hey, wait a minute. When you go down to that fundamental level of, hey, how civilization started, then you learn about, like, information infrastructure, and then you learn about industry, communications, energy, and logistics. And with those, like, five infrastructures, that's how we build our civilization. It runs on all those things,
You're
and they're
absolutely
subjected
right.
to, technological disruptions.
So you literally used history not as just past tense, but as the
Mhm.
map to kind of connect the dots forward.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a long arc of history. There's repeating events, industrial revolutions reoccur. Um, and I think when we look at these things, we have to look at these infrastructures individually. We have to understand a Perez cycle of how they get disrupted in their cycle, because they're so low level to us. And
Yes.
then we look at the convergences, and that's when things get very hairy, is when two or more start to go through this disruption, and then at their intersection sparks massive changes for our society.
So I you're talking about like I'm looking at it going, okay, people go to a museum, they kind of look, they leave, they're like, "Oh, okay, well I didn't know about that. I might have immersed myself." You're talking about a tool though, and a compass. And I talk
Yeah.
about maps and compasses and navigation all the time in kind of my field of work. But
Uh-huh.
when you think of someone like an entrepreneur, it's literally a gauntlet out there. Unless you have someone like you or, someone that's esteemed or kind of an established entrepreneur, people are starting businesses from scratch using templates and models that somebody else has created. It's kind of the
Mhm.
trendy thing or whatever their town or local city government, decides is needed or higher ed. But they don't really have this historical compass. And what you're talking about with infrastructure is that historical compass.
Yeah.
But it's what is behind this technological it's not really a revolution. Are we early, late, somewhere in the middle? Like, what's this
Oh,
pattern now
it's
that you're seeing?
early. So, so I talked about these individual infrastructures. It started with market infrastructure, and to give you an idea of how um, transformative it was, is it started. It was a clay ball. It's called a bula, and you took tokens of like wheat or corn and you stamped them on the bula. Then you sealed those tokens inside the bula, and that was a tamper-proof contract. So if there was a dispute, if somebody tried to mess with the contract, you can crack it open, see if somebody's cheating. Um, but from there, if you look at those things, what was kind of crazy, writing wasn't invented yet,
Mm,
right? Writing came after the idea of holding a promise to one another, right? Like that promise was like a record of trade. I've traded you corn, wheat, whatever. And then so what the pattern through history is market infrastructure changes, how we record our promises. So this was actually the first one. This took us from nomadic to feudalism. It changes at the scale we can cooperate at. Then it puts pressure on the information infrastructure. That is how information infrastructure is how we select information, encode it, like writing, record it, distribute it, and then other people use to retrieve and decode it. That's information infrastructure. Clay tablets, books,
mm.
newspapers, databases, and now the LLM. They all share that property, information infrastructure. Market infrastructure is how we record a promise and how do we verify. So these things have a very strong synergistic feedback loop when they get disrupted. The market infrastructure changes, and then what happens is markets demand information. That is their fuel, right? So
Mhm.
that puts pressure on the new efficient information infrastructure. And so when the clay tablet was spun up, it's like shit. We need to do this better. We need better information. Writing came out of that. Numbers came out of that. Clay tablets came out of that. Then cities, bureaucracies, people cooperating in numbers greater than the tribe. And you got this new governance model, because that's our organizational framework of how we cooperate. That transitioned our governance. So if you hop ahead, when's the next intersection of these? And this is what I'm talking about. It's the convergence of these two technologies, and they have that feedback loop on each other. That information makes the market the market infrastructure stronger, because then you got written contracts, right? And you moved past the bula, and the markets evolved into single entry accounting.
Yep.
Well, you skip forward into about the next time it happened I think we were around 5,000 BC. We go to 8,000 or about 1450. You get the printing press. But what happened in 0 AD is you got double entry accounting. And that really got picked up by the merchants of Venice. And when the printing press happened, I think in 1475, I think his name was Priscoli or Piccioli. I forget his name, but he wrote a book on arithmetic.
Uh-huh.
And what he did is in that book, it had a bunch of stuff, but it had the double entry counting techniques from the merchants of Venice. And that exploded across Europe, right? And what did that do? That destabilized
Mm.
the church's financial control, and the printing press destabilized the information control the church had. And then what happens after 100 years? You get a massive transformation at that time due to these two infrastructures feeding back on each other, and then feudalism collapses and the nation state arises from that, right? So at that boundary, and what happens at each of these boundaries is the costs of coordination with people drops. That is the outcome of more people can cooperate for less cost. It becomes more efficient. So you go from nomadic to feudal, feudal to nation state, and you can see nation states go up to 1 billion people. Um, so where are we right now? We are with crypto. Crypto's happened. We see cryptographically distributed ledger. There's a lot of confusion about it. But really, when you look at this thing, we've changed 3 times in 10,000 years. Our market infrastructure, how we record promises. Double entry accounting, we sped it up with computers, but it doesn't, it's just
The
sped up.
behavior is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, the behavior is the same. The recording of the promises is the same. So that last transition, that's when central banking was born. at the end of the Reformation and the Glorious Revolution, and we had a new organizational structure. So where are we going now, and how do you plan for it? Well, the cryptos happen, and if we take this framework, all right, cryptocurrencies happened. It's kind of hard to use,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't know if anybody's used it on your podcast, but you got private keys, you got hardware wallets, right? Then you got advanced features like smart contracts, right? That you need to be a computer engineer and a good one, a very experienced one to actually write one securely.
Well, not to mention
To
just the terminology, like the language.
oh,
It
yeah,
it's like you gotta learn a whole 'nother language. People tell
that
me all the time.
vocabulary.
It's like, how do I even know what I'm hearing?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's another thing that you point out, right? Like to run the double entry accounting systems in the modern banking system, it's a lot of vocabulary. And what do you need? You need an information infrastructure that
Mhm.
can train up a lot of the population to actually run those markets, right? So that's how nation states essentially operate. So on this new one, well, you have these advanced cryptocurrency smart contracts. Well, nobody knows how to really make those, but it is a very different story when you put somebody in front of Claude Code and you're like, "Hey, I want to make a decentralized insurance company with my community, right? And let's do it on top of Bitcoin with a multi-signature contract." I will say I cannot write that. I wouldn't want to write that. I'd hire an experienced engineer, but with Claude Code, you're going into an area where it's just you ask for it, right? So what's going to happen is those agents are going to unlock the advanced features of cryptocurrency, and that is some wild stuff you can do with that stuff. It's it's crazy. So you're at that same mixing. It's going to be that synergistic uh, convergence of the agents are going to be using cryptocurrency, and despite what you think about cryptocurrencies and the NFT scams and whatever, right? Yeah, people used it a lot to scam people. Like I love crypto. I think it's the future for sure, and it is rife with scams and crimes. It's full of criminal. Um, and I do resent those people, but you're going to get this loop, and then the agents are using cryptocurrency, and then the costs of coordination drop really low.
Yeah, and I think but what comes back to you're still coming back to promises and trust.
Yeah,
And that
sure.
has been the number one erosion of all of these informational kind of evolutions is
Yep.
you still end up with corrupt information, corrupt databases, or databases that don't tell the full picture. And that's about how people record
Mhm.
conversations, promises, agreements, and contracts. I mean,
Yeah,
we have a whole legal, and justice division of our governmental agencies to protect contracts.
yeah, 100% to enforce promises,
Right.
right?
Right.
A huge chunk of government is making records that do not change and enforcing promises,
That's
right? And
right.
enforcing sanctions. So we're going into a world where, well, if we have a smart contract, well, that thing is just going to automatically enforce. You can't, yeah, you can't we get around it. Like when I send you a Bitcoin payment, that's essentially a smart contract. Only the holder of that signature or that public key can spend those funds. That's just a single signature smart contract. Um, so you're going into an area where not only that is, say I send you $50 worth of Bitcoin, you now have a UTXO. What you can do,
UTXO. Well, what's
a
that?
UTXO is an unspent transaction output. That is
Okay.
basically you own Bitcoin. Think of it like it's the notary of, Bitcoin that can be spent. It is a UTXO is only the Bitcoin can be spent. That's all the Bitcoin that can be spent. So what can you do with that? Well, we have a system now that we can start making verifiable promises to one another. So for example, I have a UTXO. Say, Connie, let's get on a podcast. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture of myself, maybe get the feature vectors. And what I'm going to do is I am going to sign that fingerprint of my data with the Bitcoin transaction, right? And then I'm going to give that to you because we're going to be in a future soon that we're not going to know that each other are AI
Mm,
that we're generating. We're not going to know who to trust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some signed data. You're going to see me on camera. You're going to see this verifiable data. I'm going to say, hey, this is me, and you can prove it. And I'm just putting it behind $50 a Bitcoin or $25 a Bitcoin. Well, what that does is that puts a huge economic cost on people trying to impersonate at scale, right? Because when you can create information that's free, and say we are going to soon have the ability to send 100 million electronic messages, fake LLM powered electronic messages a day to everybody. Well, we need to filter that, right? We need to put a cost on those. And Bitcoin is that package deal, is that we can suddenly sign our information. And then when I put out a tweet, right, and already seen the signed signature that I gave you and you met me, you know that's from me. It can't be impersonated.
So that is like light years ahead of where most people are. And a lot of us still work in TradFi. The audience that's
Mhm.
listening is sitting here thinking about, I got account takeovers happening. I got people logging into my digital banking apps with my
Mm,
username and password, or they're, hacking into my Cash App account and they're taking over my direct deposit. There's all these ways that there's this man person in the middle that's
yeah.
impersonating someone else. We see them impersonating in card on file transaction. We see them impersonating even on mortgage documents, to get
Mhm.
they get involved with your title. They take over your title, they take over your utility bills. So we're thinking about what you just said as far as I can put information with my digital signature
Yeah.
in a packet of data, put it on a trusted blockchain network, which is similar to what we're learning about here with
Yeah.
Bitcoin, being you're encrypting a chain of information that moves from person one to person two and so forth in a like a transparent, immutable way. That's what
Yeah.
you're
100.
talking about.
Yeah, you can basically do chain of custody for information when you start combining these things, right?
Yeah.
So when you start signing, and that's going to be very important for agents. But some of the things that you talked about is when you start bringing in, like, when you get people on hardware wallets with like multi auth. So you got to sign on your phone and maybe a hardware wallet and maybe your computer if you want to be extra and careful. You got to have all three of those devices signing. Um, Bitcoin is a decentralized verification system before it's money.
Right.
So when we sign something on there, um, and I tell you I've signed it, right? In no possible way can I cheat you out of that claim. It is if it's evidence of absence is absence of evidence with a blockchain. So as soon as I sign that signature, you can verify that information without a trusted party. And that is a very radical departure from
So
how things.
let's break that down for a second. Let's go back because we talked about the bula being this
Yeah.
original way of building trust between
Yeah.
commodity traders, right?
Yeah.
And it got literally verified in this, little m-
Complete.
method
Well,
of yeah. And then but that means that the original language of exchange, of money, of trade was not about exclusion. It was about exchange of value. You have corn, I have wheat, whatever. It
yeah.
began human to human, and there was trust before there was exchange or a transaction. And then
Yeah.
somewhere along the way, we got all these tools that were designed for people that already had resources, that
Mhm.
figured out the technology. And then we have a whole bunch of individuals in every community, in every economy, in every country that gets left behind because they're the
Yeah.
least sophisticated, maybe more economically vulnerable populations or
Uh-huh.
communities. So, eh, as we think about how we design these systems, and we already talked about like crypto is really kind of hard, right? You don't really
Yeah.
know what all the terminology is. And I always try to kind of keep us back to basics on the show
Um,
where we talk about the least sophisticated, most vulnerable user. That's how we get to like complete adoption as we solve for everybody that wants to learn, that can learn, but make sure that the technology invites them in to learn and to use. So what do
yeah.
you say to that with kind of what we were just talking about? Like, who's building those kinds of tools?
So that's essentially what I'm building right now. And so when we talk about crypto and it's not exactly user friendly, very hard to use, very powerful.
Right.
Um, And if you're maxed out and you're totally wiped, and you got way more bigger problems on your plate than learning technology, you just it's way too difficult to learn. You can maybe get some basics, learn a private key, get a hardware wallet,
Right.
etc. But we're at this first time with this technology of an LLM, and they're so good now that you can just kind of say the problem, and the LLM can explain it to you in the context and the way you learn. You can first say, go to the LLM, be like, interview me to how I learn information. The LLM will turn into a tutor,
Mhm.
uh, framing the concepts in a way that you can understand. And then you can ask it about the topic, right? And if you ask it about, hey, how do I use cryptocurrency to better my life, right? Well, the agent in the future, it's going to have its own capability of making its own currencies. It is turning very quickly into something out of science fiction, because not only does an agent have access to Bitcoin and it can manage your Bitcoin for you, and that's, I think, what somebody can probably imagine if they've seen an agent like write an email. There's no reason why an agent couldn't write a Bitcoin transaction. I think that's uh, you know pretty easy to imagine.
Which
Where it
is a
gets
huge
weird,
departure from Men in Black, where we see the agents, wiping people's memory. We're saying agents can actually help expand someone's capabilities and skill sets.
yeah, it's a tool that you can turn into an educator. Like these things are wild. Like, and if you haven't used a AI agent on with like the advanced frontier models, like I cannot describe how fast it's moving. Right. So during this podcast, what I have next to me is I have this thing making a self-healing program. So when it crashes, it just repairs itself and restarts again and refixes the code. And I've given it a goal. It is so good now. A year ago, you couldn't do that. Um, and so these agents, and not only that as I do it, but then if it does something that I don't understand, I can be like, hey, you know, I'm going to slow
Explain
down.
it.
I'm going to ask, I'm going to learn, hey, why'd you do that? What's that doing? Um, and then I can learn, right? And so this tool is going to be so good at educating people and enabling people. And what's going to be really cool is LLMs are going to be running on your local devices, and they're going to be incredibly good. And that is going to be so wildly empowering for the future. And then, of course, they're going to be making their own currencies and equities. They're going to be doing very weird things because they're going to be so intelligent,
Mm.
but it'll be in the background.
Yeah, so let's explore a little bit into this kind of space, because what you just said means empowerment of,
Yeah.
getting past barriers, people that probably would have looked at a computer program before and been like, "Nope, I'm going in a different direction. That's not for me."
Yeah.
And we've been talking about history, we've been talking about technology and tools. We've gone from industrial revolution to information, revolution, and the explosion
Right.
of the internet and all this tech. There's this whole other piece though to what you just used when you use the word self-healing.
Uh-huh.
Self-healing human versus a self-healing program are two very different things. And
Uh-huh.
I think that in this kind of the world that I've been exploring, where, I try to get out in the community and I talk about, what is blockchain? And, I did a
Well,
women's summit a couple of weeks ago, and it was like empowering for them to hear, like, you mean I have value that can go on chain and I can start claiming some of that value? That's hugely empowering. That's a very emotional conversation, too. And the emotions that come up around a lot of this tech is fear. And it's
oh,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not
It's
just ignorance,
understandable.
it's fear. So
Yeah,
how
it's
do
a
how
hard
do you
thing.
see us solving fear, where ignorance you can solve with information. Fear,
Yeah.
though, requires something else. And we're back to trust again, and we're back
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
safety.
I do think trust, solves fear, and I think a big part of that is, yeah, once you kinda know these fundamental technologies, it's gonna get your bearing, right? Because there's a lot of talk about, the jobs are gonna get wiped out, right? It's really
Right.
pumping fear, into the, information sphere. And when you first take a glance at these technologies, especially the LLMs, it looks scary. And then when you work with them, and it's like,
Yeah.
these things are useless without a human. Yeah, and I make AI agents. It's in my best interest to tell people that yes, it's going to replace all the jobs and give me all your money and it'll save you a ton of money. And but that's just not the case. That's just not happening there. But we're going into a world like when you go back to the very beginning where somebody just made a clay ball, gave it to somebody. There's no permission there. You could just do it.
Right.
In the nation state model, well, your money is not your own. You literally all the money in your bank account, even the cash you hold, it says property of the US Treasury. That's not yours. You're granted economic rights. And so this is going to be a very big, I think, spiritual change for the world because what's happening is, Bitcoin you own. Your equities in your brokerage account, you do not own those.
Mm.
You do not own any financial instrument.
News flash for a lot of people right
Yeah.
now.
It is legally structured that way. They grant you economic rights, and so you don't have access to those settlement systems, they do. And the only way you can really own an equity is if you have your equities in a transfer agent, and not a lot of people know what that is. So, you're going into a world where, yes, you are just gonna be able to equitize maybe your time on the blockchain, your expertise. You're going to be able to create your own equities. It's going to be very exotic and it's going to be very weird.
Mm. And at the end of March, and for those of you that are listening, we had Paul Moosen on, who is an author and he was a award-winning investor. And we had a really deep conversation. I asked Paul to talk about Andrew capital because a lot of
Mhm.
people think, oh, I got to go get a loan. And what we're talking about today is using equity as leverage, using assets as
Mhm.
leverage, and kind of redefining collateral,
Yeah.
redefining what equity actually is. And I want to really make sure that this audience, and if you're listening, thinking about your intellectual property, your knowledge, your
Yeah.
wisdom, all of the skills that you've been building become equitable on the blockchain because you
Yes.
can
Yeah.
actually put that information in kind of this container that Andrew's talking about and prove it and sign it and claim it,
Yeah.
right? That's
And
what
it
you're
gets
talking about.
actually, I'm very grateful you brought that up because this is actually where it kind of gets into the future economy of how the world's going to change. So if you are wondering about what the future of work, you want to develop your language skills. You want to get good at written communication and delegation because what you will be doing and what knowledge work is going to be transforming into is basically automating workflows with agents. You're going to be taking your day to day, whether it's like organizing people in meetings, doing SEO reports, um, uh, uh, do sales calls, right? You're going to be putting that in an agent. Now, let's fast forward, let's start mixing it with cryptocurrency. You create that agent. There's no reason that agent cannot be created equity on the blockchain. And every time that thing runs, you get paid a dividend. Every time those tokens run, you get a percentage of the work that you create. So agents can create equity and not unemployment. Like that's the future. When you mix these technologies, you can turn the workflows and your talent in your brain into a cash flowing asset that runs while you sleep.
I'm smiling and I have to pause and take the listener back because if you've ever sat in some of your earlier careers or even in your current career and you've written a procedure and then you leave that and you flushed it all out from start to finish, written it all down, and then it gets saved on a drive, and then you leave that position, you just left your intellectual property behind.
Yeah, 100%.
So what
100%.
you're literally describing is you just gave someone literally a live wire for someone who's listening going, "I get you. I understand what you just said." And I wanted to go back and connect those dots for someone that's listening, Andrew, because that's literally what you just gave them was a
Yeah,
huge tip.
that's what the future looks like, actually. So, Um, let's look at an example. We're working in an organization, trying to get 5 or 6 people into a meeting is an incredible amount of work and coordination and time on like those 6 people, right? Usually executive assistants usually handle this kind of work. It's a
Right.
job doing that. Now, what this technology does when you mix an agent and this workflow, we'll say, and a Bitcoin payment. The reason why corporations and um, governments exist is something called Coase's law. And Coase is an economist that he won the Nobel Prize for this. He asked, like, why do we have corporations? Why do we have governments? Why not just be all free market participants? Well, it's because the costs of coordination are
Mm,
cheaper inside the organization and inside the nation state than without. Now, when you get into this technology of an agent mixing with cryptocurrency, well, suddenly these agents, my agent's talking to your agent, and it is aligning that meeting in the background for pennies on the dollar. And if it has to hire somebody, it's also doing that contract in Bitcoin, right? And so, what does that happen? Kosa's law inverts, right? And Samil Ismail talks about this. He's on the Moonshots pod, and he talks about the organizational singularity. And what this technology does, where it goes back to market infrastructure and information infrastructure, that revolution, it drops the coordination cost. And that's why the old way of governance falls and a new one arises. And so, what we're going to actually see is this technology is going to dissolve corporations from the inside out, and it's going to dissolve governments from the inside out. And
mm,
we're going to be left with a network of humans and agents working together. Now, I think the best model for that to happen is when somebody makes an agent that does work, that solves a problem, that agent, they should be getting equity from that agent. They should own that agent. They should have dividends paying from that agent of automating that economy because everybody deserves a piece of what they create. Like that is what America is built on. When you create something, you own it. And now we have this technology where we can supercharge that idea. And
mm.
then of this new world that we build, and I think we will because it's going to be very easy to coordinate. When you have these new organizations, agentic operations, they're going to just rip apart the incumbents. It is not going to be a contest when you get agents and humans coordinating with one another and they have a better incentive model, right?
Yeah.
Build the workflow up and then you can go retire because you got a steady stream of income.
Right, right.
All the talent is going to be leaving into the new system.
What I loved about this, I mean, this is, not that far off, guys. I mean, we've gone so
No,
fast
no,
and
it's
the AI
years
is
away.
moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it's still we're still gonna reach these places. However,
Yeah.
I think what we're all feeling right now is siloed worlds, right? Siloed conversations, humans blocking other humans because they're afraid or fear comes back into the equation,
Mhm.
control and dominance, and all of the emotions that come in with humans. And, we can think about AI again as a fearful place, or we can think of it as an enhancement to the way that humans interact and
Mhm.
elevate the human to human exchanges that have always been at the forefront of the marketplaces, all the way
Mhm.
back to commodity trading when it was not on a global scale, when it was local and tribal.
Yeah. That's what when people were trading, right? And
Right.
actually, I do think we may be going back to some of that because uh, the costs of actually recording that trade or creating that equity and then also pricing that equity with today's technology. The reason why we have like US dollars is so we don't have to figure out how much Andrew's time trades for Connie's time.
Right.
Or how much what are apples to oranges literally what's that pair trading.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to figure out, so we have this
Unit of
abstract money,
measurement.
margin money, that solves that problem for us, right? It does a very good job, got us to where we are. But dude, in the future, when you can basically create tokens out of everything, they're going to be able to, the machines are going to be pricing them, right? Humans aren't going to be doing price discovery. The price discovery is probably going to be built into the network itself.
So let's
Um,
talk about that because you use the word token.
yeah,
I do a lot of work with, organizations like Prime Ledger, and there's some really interesting models that are coming out around tokenization of assets, tokenization of intellectual property, creating,
yeah,
private trading networks and using tokens to do so. And then we've had all this work with the Clarity Act here in the US, trying to kind of
yeah,
like separate What's a utility token versus a securities token? Can we
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, Andrew, for what do you see beyond, like, because that kinda goes not it Bitcoin's still at the center and it's at the heart, but it's
Mhm.
also beyond a little bit with Bitcoin too. Like, what do you see there? Like, how do you see all that shaking out?
Yeah, so we got to go a little bit back into like Bitcoin as market infrastructure. It allows you to create tokens on it. That's what a cryptocurrency allows you to do. The equivalent of a token in the traditional system is called commercial paper, an electronic bearer instrument. So whoever's holding it, you assume is the owner, right? That's really what crypto is. So when you create a security in the traditional system, it basically becomes the equity. It goes through the private and public markets. It's rather expensive and slow. Um, but all it is that record of who owns that. And there's a note on it that says, this pays this much money at this rate. Um, that is the same thing as what a crypto token is. It's an electronic bearer instrument, right? It's just on a different rails, it's on a different settlement network. So how this is shaking out and what we're seeing kind of here, and they're talking about tokenization. That's all it is an electronic bearer instrument of recording ownership. Now, the way this is really going to shake out is what the Americans are trying to do is drive demand for their treasuries.
Mhm.
So they're making stable coins, which are going to be able to spread into every other country. And the other countries are going to be absolutely pissed about this because it's going to be threatening their monetary sovereignty. So, but there's a problem in this is when you go and you buy a stable coin, the way it was set up, the law was, I think it was the Genius Act or whatever like that.
Mhm.
The tokenization of these stable coins could only be done by private entities. Um, they made it illegal for the Federal Reserve to make its own stable coin. And I would say the only entity that should be making a stable coin is the Federal Reserve. Because now what you have is you've given the money printer to private interests because they're going to cheat. Because when you get a stable coin, you cannot look into Fedwire and see what US Treasury that belongs to. Like you just can't do it. You need Fedwire access, right? And you can just make these stable coins or whatever, and they'll say, oh, yes, we're going to regulate you and we're going to check. They're not going to check. And they're just no human governance system in history has been able to withstand the temptation of the money printer. And that's just what has been handed to so many private organizations. So what you're going to see is you're going to see these stable coins proliferate. You're going to see inflation skyrocket because the velocity of the stable coins is significantly higher than the old system. Stable coins settle in seconds to 10 minutes. The old system takes a week, right? So the velocity of money suddenly takes this huge, gigantic increase. And then you have more money in the system traveling with higher velocity. You're going to get higher inflation. The next thing you're going to get is you're going to get more inflation from the people cheating, and they're creating stable coins with no US treasuries backing them. Um, that it is going to be a colossal disaster, in my opinion. The way the laws have been set up and the way the market fundamentals work, because I just don't think they're going to enforce the financial crimes.
Mm.
But
There's a
you
lot
do, and I
there.
want to, yeah, and what I should actually talk about. Yes, you see the government tokenizing their securities. We're going to a future as anybody can equitize, tokenize anything. You don't have to ask for permission anymore. You don't have to go to a bank. You don't have to go to the Secretary of State to make a business to register your equity in your business to sell it. Those days are gone. They're over.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'm sure that the people that are listening are going to have to wrap their heads around different pockets of what that really means, and we won't have enough time on this show to kind of go
Mhm.
through all of those layers.
It's
However,
such a
there's a
wild departure
yeah,
from the way the world has worked.
yeah.
And yes, it is. It's hard to communicate.
Yeah, and just thinking about, like, how far I mean, it's how long it's taken us to get to clarity. The Clarity
Yeah.
Act is literally, sitting on Congress's floor, getting ready to go through the processes to really
Mhm.
review that. We know that we've got traditional stakeholders in the TradFi kinda space. We've got, exchanges and cryptocurrency exchanges in that space, and they're having major debates
Oh,
about
yeah, they're
how to do
fighting
this.
over it. Yeah, yeah, because the
Yeah,
banks, they're cooked. Silicon Valley's got their opportunity, to eat yeah, to basically eat Wall Street, and they're going for it.
right.
And, this fight is about Wall Street maintaining their monopoly,
And
but
it's
ultimately, it doesn't matter.
it still comes back to where do people trust and where is the real
Yeah,
value exchange happening, and how are creators in the economy that are building systems and solutions and building communities being recognized in that
yeah,
stakeholder system. And that is where I think people are really interested, at least when I'm out in the community, they're really interested about that is what unlocking commerce actually means. Like if I'm gonna exchange my
mhm.
value, I want I want to get compensated for my full value as a person. Everybody wants that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I think we're going to see technology really accelerate that. And when you're talking about like trust in the community, this technology gives us some very exotic things. So we've talked about making tokenizing like things that have value, monetary instruments. But what we can do is actually say, we've had a great talk here. This has been a good podcast. We can literally make a token that says, "I trust you. I think you're human," right? And we're gonna put that on we're gonna exchange it with one another,
Right.
right? And it's no monetary value. It just says, "Hey, we got a business relationship."
Yes.
That's it. That's
Yes.
it. We're
And
doing business
what
together.
I love about that actual piece, and it's actually been a concept I've been talking with a few different little founders, is about proof of attendance, proof of
Yeah.
participation,
No,
proof
that's gonna be
of
a real thing.
learning something. And there's a
Yeah.
couple of founders that I've been talking to, and they're like, they're playing with this subject and this concept of how do
Yeah.
we prove that we're learning and picking up knowledge? How do we prove that we're
Yeah.
participating in something? And then instead of it being a Google review that Google owns all of the data for, that's mine. That's my
Yeah.
experience. That's my story. And so I think there's some real opportunities for innovation there. I've been toying with one. There's a few people that are
Mhm.
really tuned into that because I think that's how we get people on board.
Yeah, 100%. And you can imagine that system of once we figure out how do we tokenize trust, right?
Hmm.
Well, soon as somebody reaches out to you that you don't know, and then they have a pile of this currency from other folks, you can like see that network is like, hey, this person, like what you'd see this person has a record of healthy business relationships. No social credit score, right? Just hey, they're participating, they're working with others, they're cooperative,
Yeah.
they're building stuff.
Right.
You don't get financial information, you just see that pro cooperative behavior and you know what? I can immediately work with that
Right.
person.
And
You can
now we're
literally
talking about relevancy, Andrew, to the blockchains. Like people have
yeah,
asked me all the time, why is one blockchain better than another? I'm like, think of them as universes. You're building and you're picking up coins for participating in economic or community building activities
mhm,
on a specific blockchain. That's their universe. And then you can hop over and pick up coins or tokens on another universe. But it's exactly doing what you're just saying. You're picking up, you got your little, you stick it in your digital wallet, and now you can
mhm.
prove that you've interacted with people in that community.
Yeah, 100%. And, a really close analogy to a cryptocurrency is like the clearinghouse.
Mhm.
And it's really like what you're talking about is you're in a different country. You pick up another cryptocurrency, you're using it, whatever systems they have. Your your location is the same, right? Geolocation's the same, but you're participating in another country, and you can, and that's I think going to be a very close analogy. Is
Yeah.
that's the idea of the network state from Balaji Severanson. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. I do think we're going to converge on one single cryptocurrency because of costs, and
Mm.
it's the agents are actually going to be driving
They're gonna drive that.
that decision. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we start measuring economic activity, really kind of seeing that proof of participation and utilization on these different projects that are going on, because they're all different projects, no different than
Yeah.
other startup businesses that are brick and mortar. I really think that I hope for, if you're listening to this, that you're picking up on some of these nuggets here, because there's been a lot of this kind of confusion and fogginess out there, Andrew. And I just want to thank you
Mhm.
for really kind of putting some meat to what does it all mean and where are we going,
Yeah.
instead of just, talking in circles in our own little ethos and like echo chamber and,
Mhm.
repeating what is happening inside of that universe. I wanted to really cross pollinate a little bit with some of the historical context and then connect some dots. So thank you for doing that. Do you have
Yeah.
any other last kind of like, I don't know, like what other
I
nuggets?
would say, there's a lot of talk about kind of a dystopian future. That AI is going to wipe out the jobs, wealth is going to get super concentrated. There's some real risk, but I would say, like everything in nature, nature provides poison and it provides antidotes. And the tools available to the future when these things get mixing are so going to be wildly empowering, and decentralizing, that it is going to enable us to build a way more better, equitable world. Like everybody deserves equity in the economy that we collectively build. We can have that future. And all what it really takes is believing. Like, don't believe the message that all the jobs are going to be gone and you're going to be just stuck. Start thinking about a future of shit. There's no governments and there's no banks, but we're going to build something better, because that is all what we've done since for the last 200,000 years. Like we've literally made life better constantly.
Yeah.
And let's just continue that.
Yeah. Humans are wired for connection and
Yeah.
collaboration and building something better than fixing problems and creating
That is our
solutions.
default.
Yeah.
That is literally our default.
Yeah. Wow. Well, if you're listening, I hope you take away some real truth from today's episode. That's what the show is all about. It's about unlocking information that doesn't make it to where it needs to go. And Andrew, thank you again for sharing some of your perspective, some of the research and intellectual property of your own, and just, some of that compassion that you have for people that are trying to embrace this technology as fast and furious as it's coming.
Yep.
So,
I encourage your readers, like, I just want the system to be built. If I fail, right, and I might, take the idea and run with it. It's just an idea. Like, have an agent, automate your process, keep the equity, get a dividend, turn it into a cash flowing asset.
so
Um,
where do they find you? Do you have a subscription, an email newsletter? Are there
Yeah,
people that you want them
I'm
to
gonna
work
get a
with you?
newsletter up and running, but it's sagasolve .com, and that stands it's SAAGA, and that stands for Socially Aligned Autonomous Generative Agent.
Ooh, thought provoking. All right, guys. Well, you heard that. We'll put those in the show notes for those of you that couldn't, capture that if you're driving the car or at the gym. Andrew will put that in our show notes for you. And thank you for the mission that you're on, for the passion that you have to educate others, and for the technology journey that you're helping us all navigate. So
Likewise, Connie. Thanks for
awesome.
fighting the good fight.
Absolutely. Well, we got to keep doing this good work together. So
Yep,
thanks
you
again
bet.
for being on the show.
Happy to join you again. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly, You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.